Welcome to our Monday Night Memories show, and sponsored by the guy in the top right corner. I think he's in the top right corner of your screen, Nate Barrett, and the good folks at Chariot Auto Group. Um, we like this segment because a we get to talk to people like Cory Palm that are doing fun projects, and today's discussion point is on the book that Cory put out just a while back. Purdue University's Ross-Ade Stadium's 100 Greatest Games. And there have been many in that venerable stadium. And the reason why we're talking 100 years, this is actually the 100th anniversary, which will be what, in November of this month. Will be the 100th anniversary of the 0-0 tie between Purdue and Indiana, as I believe if my history is right. And so we're going to have some fun things to talk about. First, Cory, thanks for taking the time. This is a busy time for you in your world. But I have to ask just on the front end, I mean, A Labor of Love, you wrote a great book on the 1943 undefeated, Purdue's most recent undefeated team, the 9-0 Boilermakers, and the great story about all that went on there. But you've been working on this for a while, looking at this. I think we talked about this in 2021, if not before, but about this project. But tell us a little bit of how it all came to pass and the challenges of putting it all together.
Yeah, absolutely. So great to be here. Thanks for having me. I love the show. It was back around 2021. We were discussing, and they were the marketing department at Purdue was talking about celebrating the 500th game at Ross-Ade Stadium, and they wanted a list of top 10 games put together. And I kind of thought, well, why stop there? But not wanting to create more work for everybody, I kind of kept my mouth shut. But the seed was kind of planted a little bit. And as I thought more about it, the 100-year anniversary was coming up, just a few years away. And I was actually talking with Matt Rector, who used to be the sports information director for football. And he and I kind of joked back and forth, well, we'll save the good idea for the 100th year in 24. And so I thought more about that. And I thought we could do a book of lists, best players to play, best games, best opponents, best teams, best performances. And it kind of all distilled down once I started working with a publisher to just do the 100 best games, and don't put 100 games, 100 years in the title, because that will necessarily date the book, and for market value you don't want to do that. So it became Ross-Ade's 100 Greatest Games, and we certainly added to it as the years progressed. We had a couple to add from 22 and one from last year as well. So we got right down to the wire, getting that submission in with the final game of the 2023 season.
Yeah, no doubt. And that being the actual 100, now this is the 101st season. But again, really, it's Nate. The floor is yours, my friend.
Well, I don't know what to do, Alan. I'm getting so full up with Cory Palm here.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect Warriors. Great stuff.
Behind, and hopefully I can catch up while he keeps writing new ones. And I feel like you're onto something, Cory. Here, your whole genre of this is perfect for this time of year, because people are starting to think about stocking stuffers and Christmas gifts, and so this is perfect for that. I can think of 4 or 5 people I want to get this book for already for them. But I guess what I was thinking about, Cory, was initially, what did you learn? I'm always interested in maybe something that the author even didn't put in the pages, but what you learned out of researching this book.
It was fun, sort of through the stories and through the research, finding all sorts of little tidbits, filling in the blanks a little bit, how different the game of college football was 100 years ago. Obviously, that's the most obvious statement ever, but still, to see it, to be picking through the old newspaper articles and photos and seeing, it takes you back a little bit into that time and how far the game has progressed in a relatively short amount of time. That was neat to see. The weirdest thing that I found was that we opened the 1931 season with doubleheader against Western Reserve and Coe College. Split the team into 2 and said, have at it, boys, and won both by shutout. I did not know until I was doing research that season ended in a national championship. that we're still struggling to get recognized officially, but it is in the NCAA record books as Purdue are national champions from 1931.
Wow.
I'd love to see a trophy at some point and that to get added. I know it was a long time ago, but it still matters. So that was neat. Seeing different names come to life through their exploits in the games. We've all heard of, some of these guys, but to actually see what they did on a play-by-play or week-by-week basis was fun. Seeing how seasons played out, and it got to a point where I started to, tell the story of the season in the preamble to each game while still trying to keep each game synopsis to about 500 words or less. So that became a task, but it was a lot of fun to see these people come to life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some great names over that. It's like the 1932 men's basketball national champion. It's, back in those days, Alabama claims about 70 national championships because it's whatever. In Minnesota, a little bit the same way, long time ago as well. Now, Alabama's obviously more recent, but yeah, it's like anybody, everybody. Good luck with that, because I had not heard that either. The 31 under Coach Noble Kaiser that they had done that. That's an interesting and a significant deal in terms of the history of Purdue football. One thing I thought was interesting too is you always struggle when you do things like this is to come up with. You're going to do all wins, or are you going to do that? And you didn't. I noticed a few of them, and there were some great games. Certainly the 1977 Purdue Notre Dame game, and was talked about last week as the anniversary of the 37-year anniversary of Joe Montana coming off the bench, and there were stories written about the injury that Gary Forsteck, et cetera. But what was your rationale that, and how, and what bubbled up to your litmus test of making it? I mean, you probably had ones you couldn't include because you had to come up with a number 100.
I did. I had a running list and sort of was swapping games out right to the end. Funny you mentioned that 77 Notre Dame game. That did not make my initial list. I was aware of that story. Clearly historically significant game and
No
a
doubt.
great game. It was competitive, right? We jump out to a big lead. Everybody's feeling good. And then, then history is made. We were taping an episode of Ross-Ade's Greatest Games podcast with Mark Herman last fall. I was taping that with Tim Newton, and Mark mentioned that game, and it stuck out. It stuck in my head. Okay, I need to look into this. And that was actually a late addition to the list was that. But yeah, you make a great point, Alan. There's a lot of wins. There's a few ties. There's a few losses. And, if the 1936 bucket game against obviously Indiana, the final game of the year, we came furiously back. Cecil Isbell with 3 second-half touchdown passes to tie that game 20-20. Well, it's just a tie in a rivalry. Maybe that's not that important. But you dig deeper on that game. There was a fella on the sidelines in a car. His name's Lowell Decker. He was in an automobile because he had just been discharged from St. Francis Hospital or Franciscan Hospital that day from injuries sustained during the training camp fire earlier that year. And so, hugely significant game for him because he was able to be there, and the team came back and tied the game. They fought for the game ball after the final whistle and presented it to Lowell Decker. And so that's a great story. That also happened to be the last game on the sideline for Noble Kaiser.
Right.
He got sick in the offseason and stepped aside. So games that really mattered, the outcome, we all want to win every game, but the outcome's less important than the story sometimes.
Yeah, no doubt.
That 35 story in the two guys that passed away, I didn't know that one, Cory. That's something I learned. Had no idea. I knew about the famous train episode.
Yeah.
But I did not know that story about the shower room in that explosion. So yeah, that was certainly something in Purdue history that I definitely learned out of this book. And I think for Purdue fans that think they know everything about Purdue football history, they're going to be surprised with something like that in there. The other thing that stuck out to me was going back at the 79 season, kind of visions of the future there, where Purdue had to go on the road out to LA to play UCLA and then come back for Notre Dame. I think about where we are now and this new era and how many teams are going to be facing that exact type scenario in the years ahead.
Yeah, it's crazy how much the game has changed, and you see the non-conference games against UCLA or USC, even to now have them be conference foes. That was a tough story to tell too, with taking that loss out in Los Angeles on a questionable call, we'll say, a questionable late hit. I guess the penalty got made, but the damage was done when Herman was out of the game. But yeah, for the team to come back and take care of business and really finish that season with one of the greatest seasons in program history, despite the early on disappointment. Great story.
Yeah, no question. And that was the game played in the Smog Bowl, 1979, and the out in UCLA or in the Coliseum. When you weigh in great performances versus great games, how did you reconcile that? Because there have been some great performances in maybe in blowouts, or did you have to look at competitive? What was your rationale as you picked those games and put them together?
Yeah, it's a great question. One that immediately jumps out is the 72 bucket game where Otis Armstrong was operating on a different planet compared to everyone else. 276 yards. He broke the Big Ten rushing record of Alan Amici that day. It was senior day for a great group of seniors whose careers didn't quite turn out how they thought they would when they came to West Lafayette. The game wasn't competitive. We beat the tar out of Indiana. I think it was 42-7 or something like that.
Right.
So not a great game, great performance. And again, the story of the day was definitely worth retelling.
Yeah. And a end to a season that with a lot of great talent on that team. Nate, fire away, my friend.
The other thing I liked, Cory, was early in the book, you have that picture of the Boilermaker holding the bucket for the first time. I think the first time I held the bucket was in '99, coming back with Jim Vrujink and Tom Schott and that crew from the bucket win in Bloomington. And you never forget your first time seeing the bucket in person, but to have that picture in there as the Boilermakers first put the first P on the bucket, and to think of how many Purdue people have held that bucket since then was pretty cool. So I liked that a lot. And then the other thing I liked was the 92 story about the Cal game. I can't remember if it was Allen on the cover, Gold and Black. One of the local publications had a headline, something like "Nighttime is the right time." And it was one of the first night game I ever went to as a 12-year-old. And I remember that victory over Cal that nobody expected. And it had been after a long run of futility for the Boilers for many years. And you had high hopes that night that maybe Purdue was turning a corner as a program.
Yeah, definitely. Nighttime football has a long and rich history around the country, just not necessarily around these parts. But think what you will of that, and I know everybody's got an opinion, but that was a special one, and it kind of gave some false hope for the Coletto era there, which we saw how that came out. One challenge from that time frame, Nate, was Mike Alstott is. Everybody includes him as a list of their favorite Boilermakers. Most of his best games were on the road. At Purdue. So going through his, junior and senior years where he really exploded on the stage, it was kind of hard to find games where Alstott had a great game and we had a good result, because, a great game in a bad loss is nobody wants to remember that. So, including Mike was really important in that era. It got a little sparse, but still feel like, he got his due and got a chance to tell some of his story.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very interesting comment, because it's really true. I mean, I can remember Minnesota game. Was it in '95 that he went crazy? And of course, there was the crazy. Well, that was a crazy game, I think, in West Lafayette too. But the craziest games were in '94 and '96, both losses up there. But that is an interesting sidelight of being able to tell, great players in that venue in terms of that. What about, all the, and again, you go into games, but the role of not only just renovation and the fact that the stadium has grown, from what, 13,200 or whatever it was in 1924 in that November game against Indiana to his high capacity of what, 69,200 to where it is now, a little bit over 61,000. Just talk about that and its role in terms of, I think you in the 1980 game against Indiana, that 24-23 game was still, I believe, the largest crowd. That in Notre Dame, they had crowds of over 71,000. But talk about the role of that.
Yeah, for sure. That 1980 game, we just talked to Bart Burrell about that last week, a couple weeks ago. 71,006, I think, was the tally there. Really, I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the stadium itself in this book. There's other places to do that, but you can mark the passage of time and the growth of the game with, how the stadium has grown. And that's why I sort of made a point every so often to point out, okay, new record crowd, 32,000 people saw this game. 41,000 people saw this game. This game was on national television. And, the early days you're talking about, the Wisconsin Badgers brought two specials down from Madison and, 800 people is like, okay, that's awesome back for the day. But 800 people get lost in that place right now. So it kind of came out in the figures and in sort of the pictures. This book's full of pictures that sort of help illustrate the growth of Ross-Ade and the modernization of the game itself, the stadium as well. And, you see the track around the field and the cyclone fence, which I wasn't here then. It's still kind of hard for me to fathom that it was just a little fence that kept people off the field for decades. But, you see that go away. And then the renovation in the early 2000s that added the press box. And now we've closed in the south end zone. Had to get with our photographer and make sure he got me new artwork last fall.
Yeah.
Because it had changed so dramatically from previous years. So yeah, it's really cool to mark the passage of time and the growth of the game through that fact.
Yeah, the track came in the mid '90s. Nate, go ahead.
I was going to say I'm about at that age, Cory, where I'm probably one of the younger ones to remember the track. You get much younger than me, and it was history. But it really was that way. You could come right out of the stands and be right behind the sideline. It's wild to think about now.
It really came about, they ended that because of the tragedy at Wisconsin. They had that in their early '90s, and because a lot of schools had that fencing, which was kind of a crowd control person. But anyway, Nate, go ahead.
Yeah.
How about September 22nd, 1945? Bob DeMoss. I like that you noted that, Cory, because of everything that comes out of Purdue football in the ensuing decades after the arrival of Bob DeMoss on campus. Including a young Neil Armstrong watching the Bob DeMoss, play and getting inspired to come to Purdue. So just maybe touch on that, how, that's the beginning there for Coach DeMoss and all the cradle of quarterbacks legends that have sprung from that moment.
Yeah, it was great to see the story of Bob DeMoss come to life, like I said, as a player, because, I've been here long enough that I remember meeting Demo for the first time and seeing, him and his wife and, the regulars at the Coach Tiller show back in the day. So yeah, to be able to tell Demo's story a little bit and that great performance in 45 and his arrival, and like you said, everything that it meant, in the coming decades. So many people who are tied into Purdue football understand the importance that he played, and later, that Dale Samuels played. But the further you get away from West Lafayette, the less people understand the importance of those people and those great men for this program, and how they developed quarterbacks and they revolutionized offenses for decades to come. It was, again, great to sort of put some evidence behind the legend.
Yeah, and that's the fun part of this, is that being able to fully articulate what really happened, and set truth to legend. And the legend sometimes works in all of this too. I mean, you want to have that as part of that. Of it. Talk about your role. You've been at Purdue for your 20th year, and how you got involved. It's really having that bug for history. Is this something you've always, I've discussed this before maybe, but is it something you've always you grew into that desire, or it's something you've been since you were a young boy watching sports?
Yeah, I started, my first real memories are from third or fourth grade, going to my brothers. I had two older brothers, going to their games, and I'd be the weird kid sitting off by, over there in the corner, because I was doing my own little play-by-play of the action on the field. I was reading the roster card and calling the action, and later on keeping stats. It was really written in the stars. A lot of us weirdos in this industry have a similar story. It's always been about sports for me. Growing up loving college football, and my first memories of Purdue are seeing the water tower during nationally televised games. That was sort of a landmark that they really showcased in the 80s and 90s. And watching Mike Allstott play, I remember vividly watching him play on TV in the early 90s. But yeah, once I got here and made the career shift into the sports information world, I kind of I became enamored with a lot of these stories, and I love the history. I love being able to tell the history, relay it to people, and maybe get some attention even years past to people who really deserve it. They did some really great things.
Yeah, no question. Nate?
Cory, I was just going to kid you and challenge you a little bit with your considerable influence in the Purdue athletics. What are some ways maybe we can follow in the footsteps of some of the other great programs in the country, and do more in the stadium to recognize some of these names? You'll see some places where there's some banners, or there's some flags, or there's some things that recognize in the stadium names like Butkovich and Keys and those kind of players. Will you try to help spearhead some of those discussions in the years ahead? Because as well as who's qualified to get that kind of recognition for when folks come back to campus.
For sure. I'd love to be involved in getting them more attention. There's been some really great additions to the concourse area and the vomitories this year. Ross-Ade, that all that art looks really good, I think. But yeah, I'd love to see a Ring of Honor, or some sort of addition with all of the additions we've seen to the stadium that honors that history. Another thing that I'd love to see is a physical Hall of Fame beyond a statue that lives on the second floor of Mackey Arena that very few people get to see. The Purdue Athletics Hall of Fame has been around for almost 30 years, and to not have any sort of central place where those people can be recognized and their stories told a little bit. I'd love to see some sort of, and we're seeing schools do this a lot. The University of Iowa's got a great Hall of Fame. Maybe that could be incorporated into Ross-Ade. Maybe it's a standalone thing. I don't know, but that's something I would love to get behind and help shepherd forward, because man, does this place deserve, this fan base deserves something like that.
Well, put Alan and I on your committee.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing too, that you do want, it takes that to build the tradition of, if you talk about, we've all been to other schools and places where they have those types of things, and it takes that certainly to be able to celebrate your tradition. Purdue has not been an elite program in football, but it has been a good program, and the storyline starting with the great names and individuals that play, but that facility and the great games, it comes down to wanting to be in Ross-Ade Stadium and be part of something. That's why college football is a big deal, and I hope we all live long enough to be able to do that, because I think it's something that's important to all of us. It's just to have that tradition on display. We understand that museums and things like that are different somewhat in the digital world, but there is a lot of hardware and things that have to have had parts of Ross-Ade Stadium are included certainly in that.
Mm-hmm.
What else? And lastly, as we can put a wrap on this, just talking about other things with respect to the book, Cory, that may surprise folks, or other things that were your favorite parts of what you put together.
Yeah, definitely. One of my favorite stories that I stumbled across, I was putting the list together, and Jack Mollenkoff's a legend. He's a Hall of Famer. He's the best coach until Tiller. Some might say better. That's a different discussion for a different day. Yeah. But I thought, well, we should probably have Jack Mollenkoff's first win in the book. It's a not very important 16-7 win over Missouri. Nothing spectacular happened, but it was, Mollenkoff's first win. So I'm going through and I'm telling that, and I stumble upon the fact that was also the first game, the debut of Purdue Pete. Sidelines in Ross-Ade Stadium is, holy cow. So the greatest coach in school history and the mascot, both on the field for the first time at the same time, and that's just a fun little tidbit that people can stumble across. Another less than spectacular game that made the list, that had to make the list, was the first home game after 9/11, for entirely different reasons. But that's another one that months later, after writing that passage, I went back and read it, and I got chills again, just because the moment that day and the environment around stadiums across the country, it takes you back remembering that.
Yeah. Nate, last word or last question? Go ahead.
I love that you stole mine, Cory, because that's one of my favorite things out of your book, is that Mollenkoff and physical Purdue Pete are on debut on the same day. Love that. And then to your point about after 9/11, a lot of us still have, in fact, it's one of my favorite pieces of Purdue memorabilia. The university and the athletic department issued a big poster that a lot of us had Roy Johnson, the longtime voice of I'm an American, sign it. Yep. From that day. And it's appeared at Bruno's over the years, and it's a great piece of art to remember that time. I think the last thing I was going to mention, Cory, is all of us on the press box level, not everybody gets to see this, but when you're on level 6, as we all are during the games, when I head to my seat, the last piece of art that I see in that hallway every time, going both ways, is that picture of Rod Woodson that you have in the book, kind of resting on his knee after his great 86 performance on senior day against IU, when Leon Burtnett surprised them with the gold uniforms, the gold shirts when they go in the locker room. You tell that really well, and I love that you included it in the book. So that's kind of my memory to end on. I think that's a great addition that you recognize that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, a non-winning season, but what an unbelievable finish to that year, and a miracle game. They haven't all been miracles, but they've all many of them have been interesting. And love the book, and I think if you're a Purdue football fan, you need to take a look at it. It is available at Amazon.com, locally at University Bookstore. Any other locations that you want to hit in terms of how it's available?
Yeah, people can find it at Barnes & Noble here in the Lafayette area as well. You can get it online at Amazon. Target has it online. Barnes & Noble has it online as well. And if you're interested in a personalized copy, happy to take care of that as well. Just hit me up personally.
All right, sounds great. Nate and Cory, thanks so much for your time. Always love this segment. Fun thing to do, and we appreciate it. I know that the knuckleheads need a little diversion these days. This is a good one. You know what? And who knows? You know what? A come from behind 51-yard field goal at the buzzer against Nebraska on Saturday, and you might have to put a revised edition online with that. So hope springs eternal, and that's part of the fun of all this. Cory and Nate, thanks so much. Thanks to Chariot Auto Group and their support of Monday Night Memories. And Nate and I have a blast doing these. It's a fun thing to do, and that's the great thing about sport is the memories of the great moments. And Cory Palm has done a great job putting those together in his book. So make sure you pick up a copy. Have a great rest of your Monday evening or whenever you watch or listen to this. And we'll look forward to our next edition of Monday Night Memories, not in the not too distant future. Thanks again.